Alien cadets try to build shelter from organic matter. Human weaves a cabin from leaves and mud. Part 1. The training vessel hung in orbit above Planet 4. Inside the briefing room, 4 alien cadets and 1 human stood at attention, walked slowly in front of them, his tall gray body moving with the confidence of someone who had trained thousands of soldiers. "Your survival examination begins in 1 hour," he said. His voice was deep and cold. "You will be dropped on the planet's surface. You will have 48 hours to complete one simple task." Sung kept his eyes forward. He was the only human in the squad, and he had learned quickly that the alien cadets did not think much of his species. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago. To most species, humans were still primitive newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. "Your task," continued, "is to build a shelter using only organic materials found on the planet. No fabricators, no technology, no communication devices except for emergency contact." One of the cadets made a clicking sound. This was a female with a shiny black exoskeleton and large compound eyes. She was nervous by nature and always calculating things in her head. Next to her stood a massive with wet blue-green skin and powerful arms. His species lived in water and on land, and they were known for their physical strength. He crossed his arms and smiled. "This will be easy," said loudly. "Building a simple shelter. My people constructed underwater cities before most species discovered fire." "Your people use machines for that," said Seven, the synthetic being standing at the end of the line. She was humanoid in shape but clearly artificial, with smooth silver skin and glowing blue eyes. "This examination tests manual construction ability, not historical achievement." Growled at her but said nothing more. Sung remained quiet. He had learned that speaking too much made things worse. The alien cadets already thought humans talked too much and knew too little. Stopped in front of the human. He looked down at Sung with 4 small eyes that showed no emotion. "Cadet, your species has limited experience with galactic survival training. Do you understand the requirements of this examination?" "Yes," Sung replied calmly. "Build shelter from organic materials, no technology, 48 hours." "Correct." Moved on, but Sung noticed that they had spent extra time looking at him. It was the same look all the instructors gave him, the look that said they expected him to fail. The briefing ended, and the cadets were given 30 minutes to prepare. There was nothing to prepare, really. They would have no equipment, no tools, nothing but the clothes they wore. The examination was designed to test raw survival ability. Sung stood by the window and looked down at 4. It was a green and blue world covered in forests and oceans, beautiful and peaceful, but he knew that peaceful planets could become deadly very quickly. Approached him quietly. She was the only cadet who occasionally spoke to him without insult. "You are not worried," she said. It was not a question. "I am worried," Sung replied honestly. "But worry does not help, preparation helps." His compound eyes reflected his image many times. How do you prepare when you have no tools and no information about the planet? "I prepare here." Sung touched his forehead. "Humans have been building shelters from organic materials for hundreds of thousands of years. My grandmother taught me when I was a child." Made a soft clicking sound. Among her people this meant confusion. "Your grandmother taught you survival techniques. Were you expected to face such situations?" Sung smiled slightly. "On Earth, we teach our children many things they may never need, just in case." "Strange," said. "My people only teach skills that will definitely be used. Teaching unnecessary knowledge seems wasteful." "Maybe," Sung agreed. "Or maybe there is no such thing as unnecessary knowledge." Before could respond, his loud voice interrupted them. "Human, stop talking and start praying to whatever gods your primitive species believes in. You will need their help today." Sung did not respond. He simply turned back to the window and continued studying the planet below. The drop shuttle was small and uncomfortable. The 5 cadets sat in silence as it descended through the atmosphere. Through the small windows, Sung watched the clouds rush past. Then the green forests appeared below, growing larger and more detailed every second. The shuttle landed in a clearing surrounded by tall trees with purple leaves. The door opened, and warm, humid air rushed inside. It smelled like plants and soil and life. "Cadets," a voice said through the speaker. It was Hana, the communications officer monitoring from the orbital station. She was also human, one of only 3 in the entire academy. "Weather systems are approaching faster than predicted. You may have less than 48 hours before conditions become difficult. Work efficiently." Laughed as he stepped out of the shuttle. "Difficult weather. I was born during a hurricane on. This forest is nothing." 7 followed, her silver feet touching the soft ground. She immediately began analyzing everything around her. "Organic composition is standard. Structural materials are available. I calculate an 87% chance of successful shelter construction." Moved more carefully. She did not like the feel of the soil and plants around her. Her species lived in cities made of metal and crystal. They had not touched raw organic matter for thousands of years. Sung was the last to exit. He stood still for a long moment looking at everything. The trees, the sky, the direction of the wind, the moisture in the air. His had already scattered to gather materials. They worked with confidence, grabbing branches and leaves without much thought. But Sung did not move. He closed his eyes and listened. Birds sang in the distance. Water flowed somewhere to his left. The wind carried the smell of rain that was still far away but coming. "Human," shouted from across the clearing. He was already carrying a massive pile of logs on his shoulders. "Why are you standing there doing nothing? Are you already giving up?" Sung opened his eyes. "I am not doing nothing," he said quietly, more to himself than to. "I am doing the most important thing." He knelt down and picked up a handful of soil. He squeezed it, watching how it held together. Then he let it fall through his fingers and smiled. There was clay nearby. He could feel it in the earth. His grandmother had taught him how to find it, how to recognize the signs that most people missed. The other cadets rushed around gathering materials they did not understand. They grabbed what looked useful without knowing what was actually useful. Sung began walking toward the sound of water. He had work to do, and unlike his, he knew exactly what that work required. Above them, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The storm was coming faster than anyone expected, and when it arrived, only one cadet would be ready. Alien cadets try to build shelter from organic matter. Human weaves a cabin from leaves and mud. Part 2. 6 hours had passed since the drop. The Forest of 4 was alive with the sounds of frustrated alien cadets. Stood before his shelter attempt and growled. He had gathered an impressive pile of thick logs and stacked them against each other like a tent. It looked strong. It looked like something a powerful would build, and it had collapsed 3 times already. "Why does it not stay?" he roared, kicking one of the fallen logs. "The wood is strong, the structure is logical." Nearby, 7 observed his failure with her glowing blue eyes. "Your structural approach lacks understanding of weight distribution. The logs are fighting each other instead of supporting each other." "Then you build something better," challenged. 7 had been trying. Her shelter was a perfect geometric shape made of carefully selected branches. Every angle was calculated. Every connection was precise. But the branches kept sliding apart. They did not fit together the way her calculations said they should. "Organic materials are chaotic," she muttered, adjusting the same connection for the 20th time. "They do not follow predictable patterns. Their surfaces are inconsistent. Their weights are irregular." "So your calculations are useless," said with satisfaction. "My calculations are perfect. Reality is the problem." On the other side of the clearing had made almost no progress at all. She sat on a rock, staring at her hands. They were covered in plant sap, and her exoskeleton was having a bad reaction to it. Small patches of her shell were changing color, becoming irritated and painful. She had tried to weave leaves together the way she had seen in training videos, but her species had not done physical construction work for 10,000 years. Her hands did not know the movements. Her instincts did not understand the materials. "This is impossible," she said quietly. "My people evolved beyond this. We use machines. We use technology. We do not touch raw materials with our own bodies." She looked around at the others, was still fighting with his logs. Seven was recalculating angles that would never work, and somewhere in the forest, the human was doing something nobody understood. Stood up and walked toward the sound of flowing water. She found Sung by a small stream, kneeling in the mud. His hands and arms were covered in wet clay, and he was humming a soft tune she did not recognize. "What are you doing?" she asked. Sung looked up and smiled. "I found what I was looking for. This is good clay, very good clay." Clay looked at the brown mud in confusion. "How is mud useful for building shelter?" "Not just mud. Clay is different. See how it sticks together." He held up a handful and squeezed it. The clay held its shape perfectly. "When this dries, it becomes hard like stone. My ancestors used it for thousands of years." Watched as he gathered more clay into a pile. Then he returned to the clearing where he had started something earlier. She followed, curious despite her discomfort. In the clearing, Sung had created a frame. It was made of thin, flexible branches woven together like a basket, but shaped like a small room. The branches crossed over each other in complex patterns that looked random but were clearly intentional. "How did you make this?" asked. "Weaving. Humans have been weaving since before we could write. We wove baskets for food. We wove nets for fishing. We wove walls for houses." Sung began pressing clay into the gaps between the branches. "This technique is called wattle and daub. The wattle is the woven branches. The daub is the clay mixture." Watched his hands work. They moved with confidence and skill, pressing and smoothing the clay until it filled every space. "Your people memorize such primitive techniques." Sung paused and looked at her. His expression was not angry, just thoughtful. "You call them primitive. We call them proven. These techniques kept humans alive on a world that tried to kill us every day." Earth said she had studied human history briefly. A death world, extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, constant natural disasters. "Yes, and we survived all of it with these primitive techniques." Sung returned to his work. "We did not have technology for most of our existence. We had only our hands, our minds, and the knowledge passed from parent to child." From across the clearing's voice interrupted them. "Human, you are playing with mud like a child. This is a survival examination, not an art class." Sung did not look up. Building takes time. Rushing leads to failure. Laughed loudly. "Your mud hut will wash away in the first rain. My log structure will stand forever." As if responding to his words, there was a loud crash. His log structure had collapsed again. His roar of frustration echoed through the forest. Above them, the sky was growing darker. The clouds that had been on the horizon were moving closer. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain. Hana's voice came through the emergency channel. "Cadets, weather update. The storm system is accelerating. Estimated arrival is now 30 hours ahead of original predictions. Please increase your construction speed." Seven stopped her calculations. 30 hours ahead. That gives us less than 18 hours to complete our shelters. "Plenty of time," said, but his voice was less confident now. Looked at Sung's growing structure. The woven frame was nearly complete, and large sections were already covered in clay. It was small, but it looked solid. It looked like it belonged on this planet, like it had grown from the ground itself. "Can I help?" she asked suddenly. Sung looked surprised. "You want to help me?" "I want to learn and," she looked at her sap-covered hands, "I want to understand how this works." Sung nodded and made space for her beside him. "Press the clay firmly into the gaps. Make sure there are no holes. The key is patience. Do not rush." Knelt in the mud beside the human. Her exoskeleton complained at the contact with organic matter. Her instincts told her this was wrong, that civilized beings did not do this kind of work. But her hands began to learn. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, she pressed clay into the woven branches. The work was simple but satisfying. For the first time in hours, she felt like she was actually accomplishing something. The first drops of rain began to fall. They were light and warm, but they promised much worse to come. And Seven looked up at the sky with concern. Their shelters were not ready. They were not even close to ready. Sung kept working, his hands steady and sure. He had built shelters like this many times as a child, practicing with his grandmother in the mountains of Korea. She had always said the same thing. "The rain is coming, little one, but we will be dry because we know what our ancestors knew." Now, far from Earth, far from his grandmother, far from everything familiar, Sung was proving that she had been right. The rain fell harder, and the alien cadets began to understand that they had underestimated the most primitive member of their squad. Alien cadets try to build shelter from organic matter. Human weaves a cabin from leaves and mud. Part 3. The rain was falling heavily now. 18 hours had passed since the cadets landed on 4, and the storm had arrived much faster than anyone predicted. Stood in the downpour, watching his latest shelter attempt slowly fall apart. The water found every gap between his logs. It loosened the soil beneath them. It made the wood slippery and impossible to control. "No," he shouted, grabbing at falling logs. "Stay together, hold your position." But the logs did not listen. They tumbled down around him, splashing into the growing pools of water. Hours of work destroyed in minutes. Nearby, Seven stood inside her geometric frame. The structure was still standing, but it offered no protection at all. Water poured through every opening, running down her silver body. Her calculations had created a perfect shape, but a perfect shape without a covering was useless. "I do not understand," she said, her voice flat but somehow confused. "The structure is mathematically sound. It should provide shelter." "Math cannot stop rain," called out from across the clearing. She had returned to her rock, but even the rock offered no protection now. She was completely soaked, her exoskeleton covered in water droplets that irritated her sensitive shell. She had worked with Sung for a while, but eventually the discomfort had become too much. Her species was not designed for this kind of labor. Her body had rejected the work before her mind could accept it. Now she sat alone, cold and wet, watching the human continue his impossible task. Sung had not stopped. The rain fell on him just as it fell on everyone else, but he kept working. His woven frame was now completely covered in clay on 3 sides. The 4th side had a doorway, still open but nearly finished. He was building the roof now. This was the hardest part. He had created a lattice of thin branches, weaving them tight enough to support the weight of leaves. Then he began layering large purple leaves from the forest trees, overlapping them like scales on a fish. "The leaves will leak," Seven observed. She had walked over to watch, having given up on her own structure. "Water will find paths between them." "No," Sung replied, not stopping his work. "See how I overlap them. Water runs down the top leaf onto the next one, then the next. It never goes up, only down. By the time it reaches the edge, it falls outside, not inside." He demonstrated by pouring water from his cupped hands onto a finished section. The water flowed smoothly down the leaf layers and dripped off the edge of the roof. Seven processed this information. The principle is similar to scale armor in organic creatures. Each piece protects the piece below it. Exactly. Humans learned this by watching nature. Fish scales, bird feathers, snake skin. Everything in nature knows how to handle water. We just what worked. Hana's voice crackled through the emergency channel. Her signal was weaker now because of the storm. Cadets, status report requested, is concerned about conditions. Do you require emergency extraction? No, shouted immediately. His pride would not allow him to fail. The cadet does not require rescue. There was a moment of silence. Then Seven spoke. I also decline extraction. I am not in physical danger, only professional embarrassment. Hesitated. She wanted to leave. Every part of her wanted to return to the warm, dry ship above. But she also did not want to be the only one who gave up. I will remain, she said quietly. And you, Cadet? Hana asked. Sung smiled slightly. I am fine. Actually, I am almost finished. There was a longer pause. When Hana spoke again, her voice carried a hint of pride. Acknowledged. Station will continue monitoring. Be safe. Walked over to where Sung was working. The massive was completely soaked, his blue-green skin glistening in the rain. He watched the human's hands move with skill and speed. How do you know these things? Asked. His voice was different now, quieter, less hostile. My grandmother, Sung replied. She grew up in a small village in the mountains of Korea. Her family had no money for modern technology. They built everything themselves using old methods. When I was young, she would take me to the mountains and teach me. Why? Seemed genuinely confused. You had cities, you had technology. Why learn methods from the past? Sung stopped working and looked at because the past is not dead. The knowledge of our ancestors lives in us. We carry it forward so that it is never lost. My grandmother said that a human who forgets how to survive is no longer human. He returned to his work, adding more leaves to the roof. Also, she said that someday I might need these skills. She could not imagine that someday would be on an alien planet, but she was right. Approached, holding her arms close to her body. She was shivering now. Her species did not handle cold well. How long until your shelter is complete? She asked. 1 hour, maybe less. She nodded and returned to her rock. But Sung noticed something in her eyes. She was suffering. They all were. The rain was cold, the wind was growing stronger, and they had no protection. Sung worked faster. His hands moved with urgency now, weaving and layering and pressing. The human body was designed for this kind of work. Millions of years of evolution had created hands perfect for building, for creating, for shaping the world. The alien cadets watched in silence. They had technologies that could build cities in days. They had machines that could terraform planets, but none of that helped them now. Now, in this wet forest on this distant world, only ancient human knowledge mattered. Sung finished the roof and began sealing the edges with additional clay. The rain ran off the leaves exactly as planned. Inside the small cabin, the ground was still dry. Come inside, he said finally, stepping through the doorway. The walls are thin, but they will keep us dry. Laughed bitterly. Pride does not let me hide in a human's shelter. Pride will not keep you warm, Sung replied simply. The storm is getting worse. This is survival training, not pride training. The rain fell harder. The wind howled through the trees. Lightning flashed in the distance. Seven was the first to move. She walked to the cabin and ducked through the doorway. Inside, she stood completely still, processing the experience of being dry. The structure works, she announced. My sensors detect no water penetration. Stood in the rain, his massive body shaking with cold. Remained on her rock, watching him. Come on, she said finally, standing up. We can be proud tomorrow. Tonight we need to survive. She walked to the cabin and entered, hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a growl of frustration, he followed. Inside the small shelter, 4 alien beings and 1 human sat together. The space was tight. His bulk took up most of one corner, but they were dry. They were protected. Outside, the storm raged. But inside the cabin that human hands had built, there was peace. Sung smiled quietly to himself. His grandmother would be proud. Alien cadets try to build shelter from organic matter. Human weaves a cabin from leaves and mud. Part 4. 30 hours had passed since the examination began. The storm outside had grown into something terrible. Wind screamed through the trees. Rain fell so hard it sounded like drums beating against the earth. Lightning split the sky every few minutes and thunder shook the ground. Inside the small cabin, 5 cadets sat in a tight circle. Sung had built a small fire pit in the center, with a hole in the roof to let smoke escape. The fire was tiny, fed with carefully dried sticks he had collected earlier, but it gave enough light and warmth to keep them comfortable. "I have never experienced weather like this," said. Her compound eyes reflected the firelight in strange patterns. "On my, we control the climate. Storms do not exist." "On we swim through storms," said. "But swimming is different from standing. The water supports you. Here the wind pushes you. The rain hits you. It is an attack from the sky." 7 sat motionless, processing data. The storm intensity has exceeded all predictions. Wind speeds are reaching 140 kilometers per hour. The shuttle cannot safely descend in these conditions. Sung nodded. "That means no rescue until the storm passes." "How long?" asked. "Unknown," 7 replied. "Weather patterns on this planet are poorly documented. It could be hours, it could be days." A heavy silence fell over the group. The fire crackled softly. Outside, a tree fell somewhere in the distance with a tremendous crash. Looked around the small shelter. The clay walls were holding firm. The leaf roof was channeling water away perfectly. Not a single drop had come inside since they entered. "Human," he said slowly. "Sung, I must tell you something." Sung looked at him and waited. "I was wrong about you, about your species." This voice was rough with something that might have been shame. "When you arrived at the academy, I called you primitive. I said your people were barely evolved. I laughed at your small bodies and your soft skin." "I remember," Sung said quietly. "I was a fool," gestured at the walls around them. "This shelter has saved our lives, not technology, not strength, not mathematics, human knowledge, human hands." He lowered his massive head. "I apologize." The apology hung in the air. For a species like the, admitting weakness was extremely difficult. Sung understood this. "Thank you," he replied simply. "But I did not build this shelter to prove anything. I built it because we needed it, all of us." Made a soft clicking sound. "That is what I do not understand. You could have built shelter for yourself only. You could have let us suffer as punishment for how we treated you. Why did you help us?" Sung was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain. The fire popped and sent tiny sparks floating upward. "On Earth," he began, "there is an old story about a winter so cold that it killed almost everyone. The few survivors gathered together in caves and shared their fire, their food, their warmth. They were strangers from different tribes who had been enemies before. But the winter did not care about tribes. It killed everyone equally." He added another small stick to the fire. "Those survivors learned something important. When the world tries to kill you, you survive together or you die alone. Humans call this community. We help each other because helping each other is how we survived." 7 processed this. "Your evolutionary history selected for cooperative behavior." "You could say that, but I think it is more than biology." Sung looked at each of them. "Helping others is a choice. Every time we choose to help, we become more human. My grandmother said that a selfish person is already dead inside, even if their heart still beats." The wind outside grew even stronger. The cabin shook slightly, but the walls held firm. The woven branches flexed with the wind instead of fighting it, absorbing the force and releasing it. "Your grandmother seems very wise," observed. "She was. She died 2 years ago before I joined the academy." Sung smiled sadly. But her knowledge lives on. That is how humans work. We die, but what we know continues. Our children teach their children. The chain never breaks. Was staring at the fire now. The way is different. We value individual strength. Each person must prove themselves alone. Asking for help is weakness. And yet here you are, Sung replied without judgment, accepting help. Yes, his voice was heavy. Perhaps my people have something to learn from yours. Hana's voice suddenly came through the emergency channel broken by static. Cadets, receiving, is watching, shelter, only structure, recording for. The connection cut out, but they had heard enough. There was watching. The cabin built by human hands was the only shelter surviving the storm. Outside there was a terrible crash. The ground shook. Something massive had fallen nearby. Sung moved to the doorway and looked out into the darkness. A huge tree had fallen just 20 meters away. If it had fallen in a different direction, it would have crushed them all. We are very lucky, Seven observed. Luck is part of survival, Sung replied. But so is preparation. I chose this location because the largest trees were not directly above us. I looked at where they would fall. Humans learn to read their environment. He returned to his place by the fire. We will be safe here. The storm will pass. We just need to wait. And so they waited. The 5 cadets who had started as strangers, who had treated each other with distrust and prejudice, now sat together in a tiny shelter made of sticks and mud and leaves. Shared some of his rations. They were strange-tasting proteins that his species needed, but he divided them fairly among the group. Found that she could produce a soft humming sound from her exoskeleton that was strangely soothing. She hummed while the storm raged outside. Seven told them about the collective, her people, who were neither fully organic nor fully machine. She explained that she had never experienced anything like this. Her entire existence had been controlled and predicted. Now, facing chaos, she was learning something new about herself. And Sung told them more about Earth. He told them about mountains covered in snow, about oceans that stretched forever, about cities where millions of humans lived together, helping and hurting and loving each other. He told them about his grandmother, who had walked 5 kilometers through snow to bring medicine to a sick neighbor. About his mother, who still lived in Seoul and sent him messages that took 3 weeks to arrive. About humanity's long journey from caves to stars. The storm continued outside, but inside the shelter something was happening. Bonds were forming. Understanding was growing. 5 beings from different worlds were becoming something like friends. And above them, on the orbital station, watched the monitoring feeds in complete silence. He had expected the human to fail. Everyone had expected the human to fail. Instead, the human had taught them all something they had forgotten, something important, something that advanced civilizations had abandoned long ago. Sometimes the oldest ways are the best ways. Alien cadets try to build shelter from organic matter. Human weaves a cabin from leaves and mud. Part 5. Dawn came slowly to 4. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a forest transformed. Trees lay fallen everywhere. Streams had become small rivers. The ground was soft and wet and covered with debris. Inside the shelter, Sung opened his eyes. The fire had burned down to ashes, but the air was still warm. Around him, the other cadets were beginning to wake. Stretched his massive body carefully, trying not to damage the walls. The storm has stopped. I can hear birds again. Clicked softly. I never thought I would be happy to hear alien birds, but I am. They emerged from the shelter one by one, stepping out into a world that looked completely different from the day before. The purple-leafed forest had been torn apart. Branches and leaves covered the ground. Pools of water reflected the gray morning sky. Sung walked around the cabin, inspecting his work. A few leaves had torn from the roof, and one section of clay had cracked slightly, but the structure had survived. It stood solid among the destruction, a small monument to human knowledge. It held, Seven said. There was something in her voice that might have been wonder. Through all of that it held. They walked through the forest toward the original drop zone. The clearing looked like a battlefield. Scattered logs were spread across hundreds of meters. Seven's geometric frame had been completely destroyed, its pieces broken and twisted by the wind. Reference shelters built by tech-equipped academy teams had also been tested during the storm. The cadets found the remains of 3 different structures. All of them had failed. Advanced materials, calculated designs, sophisticated construction methods. None of it had mattered. Only the shelter built by human hands had survived. The sound of engines filled the air. A shuttle descended through the clouds and landed gently in the clearing. The door opened and emerged. He walked toward them slowly, his 4 eyes scanning everything. He looked at the destroyed reference shelters. He looked at the scattered remains of the cadets' failed attempts. Then he turned and looked at Sung. "Cadet," he said, his voice was different than before. The coldness was gone. "Show me your shelter." Sung led him through the forest to the small cabin, examined it carefully. He touched the clay walls. He studied the woven branches. He looked at the overlapping leaf roof. "Where did you learn to build this?" he asked. "My grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her. The knowledge goes back many generations." "How many generations?" Sung thought about it. "Thousands of years, maybe longer. Humans have been building shelters like this since before we wrote books." Was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his words surprised everyone. "The galaxy has forgotten something important. We have become so advanced that we no longer remember what made us survive in the beginning. We built machines to do everything for us. We stopped using our hands. We stopped learning from our ancestors." He looked at Sung with new respect. "Humans have not forgotten. You carry your history with you." "We try," Sung replied modestly. "Sometimes we forget too, but there are always people who remember, people who teach the young ones." Stepped forward. "I must report something. This human saved our lives. Without his shelter, we would not have survived the night. I request that this be noted in official records." Added her voice. "I also request this." Cadet demonstrated skills that none of us possessed. He also demonstrated generosity by sharing his shelter when he could have kept it for himself. Seven nodded. "My calculations support their statements. The probability of survival without the human shelter was less than 12%. Listen to all of this." Then he turned back to Sung. "You have passed the examination, but more than that, you have taught something to this old. I have trained thousands of cadets from hundreds of species. I thought I knew everything about survival. I was wrong." He reached into his uniform and pulled out a small metal pin. It was shaped like a shelter, simple and old-fashioned. "This is the Survival Instructor Certification. Only 11 beings in the entire academy have earned it." He pressed the pin into Sung's hand. "You are now the 12th, and the first human." Sung stared at the pin in his palm. He had not expected this. He had only done what his grandmother had taught him. "Thank you, but I cannot accept this alone." He looked at his. "They helped me, packed clay even when it hurt her body. We survived together." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "And there is the lesson. Survival is never truly alone. Every being depends on others, whether they admit it or not. Another thing humans understand better than most." They returned to the shuttle together. Before boarding, Sung took one last look at the small cabin in the forest. It was already becoming part of the landscape, blending with the trees and soil around it. One day it would fall apart. The clay would crack. The branches would rot. The leaves would return to the earth. But the knowledge that built it would live on. Back at the academy, the examination became famous. Videos of the human's shelter spread across the galactic network. Cadets from every species began requesting lessons in primitive construction techniques. Sung found himself teaching a class of alien students how to weave branches. Was in the front row, her hands now protected by special coverings that let her handle organic materials without pain. Sat in the back, too large for the regular seats but too proud to miss the lessons. Hana watched from the doorway, a smile on her face. She had known Sung would succeed. Humans always found a way. It was what made them special. In his office, finished writing his official report on the examination. He read the final paragraph one more time before submitting it. After 300 years of service, I believed I understood survival training completely. The events on 4 have proven me wrong. Humanity, the youngest species in the Galactic Council, has something to teach us that we have long forgotten. They remember their ancestors. They preserve their knowledge. They share freely with those in need. Perhaps this is why they survived their death world when so many species did not. Perhaps this is why they will continue to survive, long after older civilizations have faded. The galaxy should not underestimate humans. They carry the wisdom of ages in their hearts and hands. He signed the report and sent it to the council archives. In the classroom, Sung held up a handful of clay and smiled at his students. "Today," he said, "I will teach you what my grandmother taught me, and someday you will teach it to others. This is how knowledge survives. This is how species survive. Together, across generations, we keep each other alive." Outside the window, stars filled the sky. Somewhere among them was Earth, the death world that had created humanity. The small blue planet that had taught its children to build, to weave, to create, and most importantly, to never forget. The lesson began.